Welcome to Transformative Principal, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I'm your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Welcome to Transformative Principal. This is a continuation of the Summer of AI series, which is turning into the Fall of AI series, but that's okay. I'm excited to have on the podcast today Kiran Athota and Wendy Oliver, both of which who are with FocalPoint Education, which is one of the sponsors for the Summer of AI series, and I thank them for that. Start with Kiran. Kiran has always been at the forefront of EdTech innovations. He's the founder and CEO of FocalPoint Education, and he led his team in groundbreaking developments in an XAPI-enabled adaptive learning platform and assessment platform, and overcame education data silos with FocalPoint's proprietary data interoperability model. Now, if that sounds super nerdy, you are right, it is, and that is why Kiran is here on the show today. You're going to love what he talks about. Wendy has been on the podcast before, and she's been had over 20 years of experience in digital education. She's a Tennessee teacher and administrator, and she loves doing innovative things and creating amazing learning experiences for students. She is the Chief Learning Officer at FocalPoint K12. Kiran and Wendy, thank you both so much for being here. Kiran, would you start by just telling us a little bit more about FocalPoint?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Again, thrilled to be here. FocalPoint has been empowering educators with data solutions. We have a platform that focuses on data, brings those insights to all the stakeholders. I mean, from administrators at the state level and the district level to classroom-based teachers and students and parents. Where we excel is we leverage the data with AI so that we can provide that actionable insights in terms of teaching and learning for students.
Yeah, very cool, very exciting. And as you mentioned later in the show, which we'll talk about a little bit, you have been doing AI for a long time, but the generative AI that came with Chat GPT that allows for much more creativity has expounded what you're able to do, which everybody has seen and really did kind of come out of left field for a lot of people who were not quite prepared for that. I'd like to ask each of you what people have to look forward to in this episode. So Wendy, would you like to start? What's the highlight of this episode that people should walk away with?
I think one of the things is we're starting to see some trends and conversations on some of the strengths and areas for growth with AI from a practitioner's perspective. And some of those areas are opportunities for growth in policy and procedure. And some of those things that we talk about are areas of products that are certainly able to help educators in the classroom, and even some innovative ideas of maybe some political ideas of where we're going and what needs to be done in order to actually implement these products that involve AI, and some of those barriers that need to come down in order to implement them. And that's not to skirt around the technology, but in order to actually implement the technology, there are going to be some changes that need to be made. And that was a pretty fun part of the discussion.
Yeah, very good. Kiran?
Totally agreed. I think what was interesting when you mentioned about the plagiarism and how we were looking at different aspects of it. I mean, there is a technology-based way to look at it. Wendy was talking more in terms of using, the change causing that effect. I think that discussion was definitely very open, and I think something that will continue and evolve.
Yeah. My favorite part that I'm excited about is the idea of finding new ways to assess our students that are not as painful as state assessments. So again, thank you both for being here, and we will get to our interview with Kiran and Wendy from FocalPoint K12 in just a moment. So, Kiran, the place I'd like to start out is, could you help us understand the difference in the natural language processing used in something like Chat GPT and what machine learning was like in the first intelligent teaching assistant that Georgia Tech delivered? And many people may not know about that, so feel free to give whatever background is needed there.
Absolutely. Think just to give a context, I mean, when we refer to Chat GPT, we're talking about the generative AI, the thing that caught the world by surprise, our innovation that came in just in time. But folks have been using AI over time. I mean, as an entrepreneur myself with FocalPoint and working with several higher ed institutions, and this use case here is on the Georgia Tech, where the AI was being used as a teaching assistant tool, right? So when we talk about natural language processing, I mean, it's just the evolution of the natural language processing. Think of it as, ChatGPT as an intelligent teaching assistant, right? Which is a lot much smarter, right? Compared to the AI that has been being used, which still is based on that language, but in a very early level. And it's rules based. It requires a lot more training, but it would still do the job, right? But now that what's happening is with the Chat GPT and the generative AI ability for having that assistive tools have been grown in many folds, because Chat GPT is already came in prepared with deep learning and a lot of data that it already has. Hope I kind of explained the difference. Wendy, if you want to add anything, please go ahead.
Well, I would just say, from a practitioner's perspective, one of the neatest things about that particular project was that when they surveyed the students did not know the difference in a human graduate assistant in the control group and the machine learning. That they couldn't tell the differences. And that was really interesting from an experiment perspective. And then in addition to that, it obviously saved an immense amount of time. And one of the reasons why they did not recognize the difference is because through that traditional machine learning, they were able to get the responses that they needed, and it was certainly given in a timely factor. And so if you fast forward, and this is where I often like to parallel with Moore's law, and I don't know how familiar your audience is with Moore's law, and it does specifically apply to hardware. But essentially, it's a physics concept that the number of transistors on a microchip roughly doubles every 2 years. And a good example of that is our cell phones, right? So our cell phones continue to get more powerful, but they get smaller and smaller. And so if you think of AI, we're really just beginning with this natural language processing. So if we were looking at this Georgia Tech experiment and it was more traditional machine learning and it was that powerful then, imagine where we're going to be in even 3 years with natural language processing, as far as how responsive it will be to learning and to education, and to just the language concept of it, and in education, what it can do to personalize learning for our students.
Yeah, I think that that's really powerful. And this also leads into one of the things that comes up every time I talk about AI, which is that teachers are afraid that kids will use AI for cheating and use it for plagiarism. And, I've looked at several different policies that school leaders have created around this idea, and so many of them are just going in the wrong direction. And what we really need to do is understand that this is a tool like anything else, and find ways to make it make sense. What's your thought about students using AI for plagiarism?
So I have to jump in here before Kiran speaks to this. As a former English teacher, any student is and can plagiarize, right? And there are numerous tools out there to catch it. But the reality is the best tool is the teacher to catch it. If I understand and I have worked closely with my students, I can recognize their writing style. I should know their capabilities. But we need to teach them how to use this type of technology for their professions and their careers. If we eliminate it, they aren't going to have it. They should know how to use it. They should know how to use it for brainstorming. Use it to help students with rough drafts. I've been monitoring some Facebook conversations among teachers, and I'll tell you, Jethro, that is the number one concern that I see is, oh my gosh, students are going to plagiarize. And, I want to say, okay, let's be creative. Let's figure out how to use this tool in the classroom. Let's create some authentic assessments. Let's do some in-class essays. Let's not be afraid of it. I think that response is what is typical with new technology in the classroom. We become very afraid. When I started in online learning, what I found was so interesting in our science classes in the state of Tennessee was that no one was doing any of the online labs, and I couldn't figure out why. So we went and we audited.
Fascinating.
Yeah, we went and we audited some of the classrooms, and what I found out was as soon as something went wrong, teachers shut down and they went back to the traditional way that they knew how to do things, which is natural, right? And I think that's what's happening here. Is we're just scared of change, and we can't be. And then, of course, Karen, you explained it to me in a great way, which is how we're implementing the technology. One of our tools is, well, Karen, I'll let you speak to plagiarism and how we're using that technology in one of our tools.
Yeah, again, I think 100% with what you said, Wendy, is, it's a change. It's a new technology. So there's that factor. And it's easy to jump into conclusions saying, okay, hey, it's being used for the wrong things. But, I think that the other side of it is, just like the tool can create this content, the tool can also tell that it created the content. I mean, there are many ways to flag it. This is so you should not be afraid of using it in a classroom, as long as it can provide that feedback. I mean, to teachers or to say, hey, this was not an authentic thing the student has done. This was coming from somewhere else. I mean, I think the tool can provide that assistance to teachers so that they can tell. So I think it's more about adopting and embracing that new technology. I don't think plagiarism would be a big factor. I know there are concerns, but just like, we are looking at innovative ways to introduce this new technology, comes with it is to addressing things to these concerns out there.
Yeah, I appreciate both of your perspectives on that. And I would just add, I'm starting a doctoral program, and the university has a policy against using artificial intelligence that is phrased like this, which I think is interesting, which is basically unauthorized use is what they're calling it. And if you do it without permission from the instructor is what the real issue is. And so what I think is really fascinating about that is that it's taking a perspective of you have to talk with the instructor and be on the same page about this. And so that is at least a step in the right direction. Contrast that with a school principal who emailed me and said, hey, can you teach me how to use Chat GPT to write a policy that will prevent students from using Chat GPT in my school? So the hypocrisy and irony there is just mind-boggling to me. And then I looked at another one that says, hey, we actually encourage you to use this tool and talk about it. And as long as you cite your source and say, I got this from this place, from Chat GPT, then it's totally fine and there's no big deal at all. And so as with a lot of things, like, you need to show your work and show how you got there. And that makes it a much more appropriate way to approach it, rather than saying you can't use this or we're going to look for plagiarism. Here's my other piece on this. If you are spending your time and energy looking for plagiarism, then you're focusing on the wrong thing. When that is focusing on when the deed is already done, the act is completed, then you're trying to clean up the mess. And all that creates is more work and more expense for you to try to figure out what happened and trying to catch people doing something wrong. I really believe that the effort should be put into the front end of teaching kids how to use it effectively, how to disclose that they're using it if that's necessary, and it isn't always. And I just want to share one example real quick. There's a great tool I love called AudioPen, that link in the show notes, AudioPen You can check it out. And what it does is it takes you from your messy thoughts into clear text really fast. And I had an assignment in my class that was just to introduce myself. And there are a couple of ways that I could deal with this. I could type in my bio, which would be fine. I have a text expander snippet saved, so I type 5 characters and then it pops this up. But I wanted to do something different. So I spoke into this recorder and then it rephrased it for me. So that instead of long, rambling, annoying, boring speech, it gave me this nice clean text that I was able to paste into the document there. Now, is that wrong? Is that plagiarism? No, it's not plagiarism, because how do you plagiarize your own bio? That doesn't make any sense. But is that quote unquote unauthorized use of artificial intelligence? I didn't tell the teacher that I was doing it, and so maybe it is. But then, does it actually matter? And do we need to even worry about that? Those are a lot of the questions that people are facing right now, and little simple situations like that matter in this conversation. Any thoughts on that, Kiran or Wendy?
I'll hop in there, Jethro. First of all, congratulations on your doctoral program. That's really exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that, and you kind of hit me in a sore spot. So number one, I agree with your tertiary example. I think as long as they're citing their sources, it's a great way to use it. Now, I don't think it's appropriate to put in a prompt and have Chat GPT write the essay, right, and then cite your source and have it do the work completely for you. But again, that is a learning conversation with a student. But to the example of your doctoral program, in my doctoral program, for example, there were other participants who rode on my coattails, and nothing was done about that.
Yes.
So,
oh
right?
man.
And so why was right? So why was that okay? But what you're doing, using a tool, but doing your own work and having your own original thoughts, why is that not okay? Right? In theory. And it's the same thing with students in the classroom. You know, it's another reason why I always had challenges with cooperative learning groups. You want to do the cooperative learning groups because children need to learn how to work together, but there are always those students who end up doing all of the work. So again, I certainly recognize your question. I see that it is a problem, and I agree with you. They're focusing on the wrong things. And with that, I just want to share, and then I know, Kiran, you had a thought that you wanted to share. I think this will be really interesting because there is so much dialogue on what is going on with AI. We are doing some marketing-based focus groups to see what is happening from a policy and procedure perspective with AI. And we're doing it in several different states with leaders in education, because I truly believe that that is going to drive the implementation and the creation of products. And so I think it will be really interesting to see what the adoption looks like and what those policies look like. And I think it's going to vary widely across different districts, but I do believe that will shape and drive what a lot of the products look like that are on the market, at least in K-12.
Yeah, very good. Kiran?
Yeah. One quick thought, and I think I totally agree with what you were talking about, Jethro, and what Wendy was talking about. I think, having Chat GPT ability to help students, right, that bio that you talked about, or a paper, should be more welcomed, because you are now having the student participate in an engaging conversation. It's not like, go find me a paper on this and just give me a read. It's more, you're working with a natural processing tool, which is very smart out there, giving you that constant feedback and you are building up this, right? So that ability is more important than just saying, hey, you should not use ChatGPT. I mean, because it is a plagiarizing thing. So I think there is a lot more value than just saying, oh, it's not your work.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I so appreciate that perspective, Kiran, because it's not just about using it to accomplish work. It's about the process that you go through while using it to improve your work, which that's what we want, right? We want kids to turn in their best possible work. And so let's make that happen. Kiran, would you speak directly to how FocalPoint is using artificial intelligence and what kinds of things you are creating or how you're using it or anything else you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, thank you so much for that opportunity. We as FocalPoint have been using AI for several years now, but ChatGPT gave us a different dimension in terms of where we are heading with some of our product innovations. Most importantly, in two ways, right? I mean, the first that we look at is how do we help teachers, right? I mean, in terms of bringing them back the time, right? I mean, so we are looking at adding teacher assignment scoring, if you will, or teacher prompt scoring using the Chat GPT, right? I mean, that what it also does is it's not only just scoring an assignment or a prompt, but also gauges student grasp on concepts, creativity, his reference utilization, and other skills. So essentially, we are getting a multi-dimensional score, right? I mean, it's not just whether you got a 4 or a 3, but you're getting this data set which is on that different scale, right? I mean, so that again, value there is that we are using that to build that learner profile, which again helps from a growth perspective, measuring from a growth perspective, or also measuring and also informing the personalization, right? I mean, the students, how they would approach the learning. Right? The second aspect that we are looking at is the student engagement, right? I mean, over years, how the investments have been done in EdTech, and a lot of tools have been in the market, and we have excellent tools in that regard too, where we are be able to target a student, I mean, with a diagnostic or on an assessment, and say that these are the academic standards that we need some kind of remediation or engagement in. So that part is already there, right? I mean, so what we are looking at is, okay, how do we make that more engaging for a kid? And I'll tell you a simple small story. And again, I know that it is very relevant here. I built the Georgia longitudinal data system, in 2008 over a Race to the Top grant. Part of it was we had stakeholders, every part of Georgia, state of Georgia, I mean, from rural districts to urban districts. And part of the requirements, I was part of a team traveling to these places. And here I went to a classroom in rural Georgia, and I said, we can provide you this standards mastery dashboard. We can tell you exactly where the student is, where the weakness is, and all that. And the student looked at me, a teacher looked at me and said, Kiran, I know that Johnny is struggling here. I already know that. You are giving me a fancy dashboard to tell me that. How would I get Johnny from here to here, right? I mean, that is the engagement, and that had that conversation had a huge impact on my drive back to Atlanta from the district. And I was thinking about, okay, I'm talking about decision support, and I'm talking about actionable, all that stuff, but how do I make Johnny engage, right? So what generative AI is giving us is that engagement. You now, if you take a same example of a discussion or a quiz, now with ChatGPT, you can gamify it. You can take the same discussion and you can make it role play kind of a discussion. You can make it a quizzy kind of a discussion, right? So now you are meeting the student in multiple ways. Still the same concept, but you are now expanding the horizon a lot more. So I think that is a powerful, huge opportunity for reaching to that student, right? So I think that's where we are really focusing on in terms of our learning management system. When the students actually come to a point where they need to learn a certain topic, it's not just showing the lesson, but also trying to engage with the student so that he can learn that lesson.
So one of the things, Kiran, that's making me think of is the professional development that I do with schools around curriculum and things like that is called student-driven learning. And the way that I explain it to people is that the teacher's job goes from being a sage on the stage to what has then become a guide on the side to what I call a compass among us. And the role of the teacher as a compass is to point to where the thing is that the kids need to be doing to get back on track, right? And so where I see, and what you're saying is filling this vision of me, is that the teacher's job is really to follow behind the students and notice where they pass off specific standards. And where I see real value from these AI tools is that they can then take what the student has learned and say, hey, even though this is English class, the student demonstrated an understanding of this social studies standard over here that has nothing to do really with what we're talking about here. But because they understood this and said this in this certain way, we now know that they actually understand that piece. It's one thing to answer the letter C on a multiple choice question, but it's a very different thing to apply that social studies standard to something in an English or math or science class that is not totally related. But there's no way for the system to know that student understands that in the current setup of how school works. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I think I'm very sure, Wendy, you are ready to jump in here. So I mean, but that is very much how we see. I mean, we call it a progression, and we say how that the scaffolding and how these things are all linked, so the system can track that mastery. I'll stop here, Wendy.
No, it's a concept that Kiran and I have actually drawn out and worked on for a few years now. And I think that the technology is now where it needs to be to allow for it to happen. And it's something that I have struggled with from the academic side of the house with, why do these children have to start over at the beginning of every year? And why is right? And we know from a learning theory perspective that we don't learn in isolation. And, anything that they can do that's interdisciplinary, that certainly enhances their learning, right? And that's a much better testament to learning theory. But if they're learning things in other classrooms, even though they're segmented, if we can document that and if we can demonstrate that, then why are we holding these children back because they're on separate standardized tests, or they're demonstrated completely separately? So maybe the ELA teacher or the math teacher doesn't know that they demonstrated this in a different class. And what Kiran and I envision is that the AI can really pull in assignments specific to areas for growth and areas for strength. And it can be based on where the child is showing areas for growth. Meaning, if I demonstrate that I show improvement or greater areas of growth through specific activities, then those are the activities that the AI can bring in for me, which would then give me a more succinct learning path. And so then students are going to start experiencing success. And so you're going to increase their motivation and their engagement. And I think that is so extremely critical for anybody's child, but in particular when we're looking at these children who have not experienced success over the past couple of years, just for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I think for me, that is so amazing about where we're at right now, that the technology is actually at a point where we can start doing some of those things and really make an impact that I think is just going to be incredible. And I haven't been this excited about something actually making a change in education for a long time, because a lot of things are just more of the same. And like, even when you talk about engagement, Kiran, I think that engagement is not a big enough word to describe what is possible, because the phrase we use on this podcast is enrollment, which is where the kids are deciding to be enrolled in whatever it is that they're doing. Because you can fake engagement and you can pretend to be engaged, or you can be engaged and not have any meaning behind it. And what we want is for kids to be enrolled in their own education, be passionate about what it is that they're learning, and care about it at a level that they're actually getting the things that they need that's delivered right to them, which I think is a really powerful way to do things. All right, so last question that I'd like to ask each of you for your response on, and this is something that when I think about what it is that we're doing, how do we make it so that these things get to kids and that they have these experiences without resorting to the legislatively convenient process of doing state assessments and the things that everybody in school hates? Teachers, students, parents, nobody likes state assessments, but we all do them. And the only reason we do them is because they are something that is legislatively convenient for our government to say your school is working or not. So how do we move away from those things and still provide real value and real evidence of learning for our students, so we know how they're doing? What's your response to that?
Okay, so I have to tell you, Jethro, what I sent Kiran this morning at 6:30 a.m.
I like it.
Oh, I have to, because you asked this question. So my 11-year-old's getting ready. This is her first year in middle school, okay? And she says, "Oh, we have another diagnostic today." Okay. And so, Kiran and I were prepping for this interview yesterday afternoon. So here's what I said. Reflecting on our conversation yesterday, if AI works like we discussed, the assessment lobbyist mafia might track us down, because there would be no need for diagnostics each year. That would be amazing to relieve test anxiety, save instructional time, and reduce error. So I absolutely had to share that, as silly as that may sound, that I sent that at 6:30 this morning. But to the point in your question, and as a former, I ran a $30 million state program years ago. Okay, that was very successful. But when you've seen it up close and you've seen that a lot of things in education are motivated by money and not by what's in the best interest of children, your question makes a ton of sense, and I understand where it's coming from.
Yeah.
I think what I have seen since the pandemic is parents have realized that they have a voice in education, in public education. And I don't know they realized how much of a voice they actually had prior to the pandemic. I think that voice and choice offered by parents and them taking a stand in that is really what's going to have to happen. And I think we're going to have partners in education, not necessarily vendors in education.
Yep.
And I don't know that every educational business is a partner with schools as much as they are vendors. And so the tools truly are going to have to be developed with teachers and students in mind. And that sounds very naive, but I do mean that sincerely. And there are a lot of good folks out there, but that I think is what it's going to take, is a partnership between schools, parents, and partners, not necessarily vendors, and to change what we have experienced thus far.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Wendy, I think that's really powerful. One of the things that I've been saying a lot in the AI space is You as a school leader or as a teacher, you are voting with your wallet and your attention. And so if you are giving time, attention, and money to vendors or to companies, you need to be involved in the conversation. And I don't think that every ed tech company wants as much conversation with schools about what they need. They want to solve their problem and sell them a product, but you really need to take the time and work with those who want to help you find a solution. And if money changes hands, that's fine, but they need to be focused on serving you, not on you buying their product. And there is a difference there. And as a principal myself in the past, I've seen when companies want to sell me something and when they want to help me solve a problem and partner with me on it rather than just selling me something. Kiran, what would you add?
Yep. So, I mean, quickly reflecting to what you said on the EdTech partnerships, one of the things that I know we never got an opportunity to talk about here is, it's more important from a student privacy, data security point that when schools and districts talk to education vendors, right? I mean, now, what we used to have are safeguards. I have a server that's secure, or some things. I mean, your database doesn't apply anymore. It gets into a bigger open environments. So when you are partnering, looking at that vendors, you got to look at those angles. I mean, there are guidelines. FERPA is a guideline. SOC 2 is an important guideline, right? I mean, that you look for vendors for that kind of certifications. I mean, obviously, good old ISO certification, it's like a gold standard, right? I mean, that the vendors are making sure that they have proven practices, right, in terms of safeguarding stuff. So again, I think the partnership has to be, where the choice need to be made based on some of the things that vendors have intentionally made commitments to, right? I mean, to make sure that the security is in place, right?
Yeah.
And I just want to add one final thought from what Wendy was talking about is, we talk about this summative data assessments, I mean, end of the years. I think the key difference there the key data point there is that if we have a good, authentic way to measure student progress throughout the year and also across years, then there is no need to do that end of the year test. I mean, that's where the challenge is, right? I mean, you if you can really get that, and I think what we need to look at as stakeholders in this, right? I mean, as tech companies, as practitioners on the field, and is that how do we leverage this technology that's out there where we can start measuring that on a day-to-day basis, and then have that report available for any analysis or any accountability measures. I don't even want to talk about that aspect of it, but whatever that states would decide, right? I mean, so again, I think that's where you start off with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really think that idea of having the content in having the understanding of what kids know and are able to do throughout the year makes it so that you don't necessarily need that end of the year assessment. And so really it's about finding a way to formalize that so that we can say, yes, here's the certification. I was talking to somebody the other day and they said, well, like, why is this such a big deal right now? And I said, if you think about it this way, that a teacher's job is to certify that a student has learned the things that they need to learn. Right now, the only way for them to do that where they are trusted is by doing this third-party exam. And one, that's a problem that we can't just trust a teacher when she says the student knows this. And two, there has to be a better way to do that, that there's got to be a way for us to be able to manage that within the school year, know what kids are really learning and be able to demonstrate that. So I want to thank you both for this conversation. This has been great. If you'd like to learn more about FocalPoint, you can go to FocalPoint.Education and learn more about what they're doing. And it's been great having you both here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Jethro.